Welcome to Value Selling Associates Complimentary Webinar. This is our monthly opportunity to share ideas and content to our clients and followers of Value Selling Associates. And as I look at the attendees, I see that we have people from Finland, from Poland, Carlos from Guatemala, so we have quite an international crowd joining us, as well as Fairfield, New Jersey, and states across the U.S. And so that is really a pleasure to have all of you joining me today. And with that, I want to say good morning, good afternoon, good day, and good evening. With all the different time zones we have, I hope I've covered everyone. I'm Marilyn Janis, and I'm going to be with you for the next 45 minutes talking about the customer or client conversation in the context of listening. So I'm excited. Let's get started. It's a noisy world we live in. We have many challenges. We're all trying to keep up, and we have much distraction. And that is challenging, particularly when, as salespeople and leaders, the most important part of our job is communication. Having conversations, and that means both talking and listening. That listening part is getting tougher and tougher, particularly when, according to the Associated Press, attention spans have shrunk by 50% over the past several years. In 1998, the typical person tested to a 12-minute attention span. 10 years later, that'd be 2008, that attention span was 5 minutes. Heaven knows what it could be now. Of course, there's an impact to all of that. And that impact has to do with our ability to remember what's being said, particularly when we are talking and listening in the business context. So if you forget or you don't manage to hear the most important points made in a discussion, this could make the difference between your professional success or failure. So with the challenges of media, texting, video, DVD, TV, and general information overload, plus the fact that we all seem to be working harder and longer, we deal in a multicultural environment many times, and it becomes even more important to ensure that not only do we listen, but that we make the effort to listen and to ensure that we understand what we hear. And even when we're trying to do that, even when we're making good, strong, honest attempts to listen, there are barriers inherent in our world and in our workplace. Most people go through their daily lives engaging in conversations with friends, co-workers, and sometimes members of their family. But many times we don't listen as well as we could or sometimes should. In addition to having the distractions in the environment, bias may exist. There's noise that we have to think about. We have new technologies or the sense that we need to rush because of time constraints. We might not all share the same primary or first language, which can make the receipt of the messages more difficult to capture and understand. And of course, dealing with stress can make it difficult to focus on the task at hand. What's the result of all of this? And better yet, how do we get around it? Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's pretty much a given that maintaining the attention span is challenging. And it's pretty much a given that we have more to accomplish in less time. Enter the skill we're going to talk about today, active listening. Active listening is all about building rapport, creating understanding, and developing trust. By learning the skill, and by further developing that skill that you already have, you will become a better listener and will be more likely to actually hear what the other person is saying, not just what you think they're saying or perhaps what you really want to hear. Active listening is a proven technique that helps people talk and feel free to continue talking. And when we look at that from our customer or client or prospect's perspective, That's important to our success. In our world, as business leaders, that's important, and as sales professionals, that's important. And so, listening is important to our customers. Put simply, if you think of your experience, I know that you'll agree that we all like people who are interested in us. So it only follows that our prospects and clients and customers like people who are interested in them. I always try to think of the content of the bubble over this man's head, WIIFM. What's in it for me before picking up the phone or getting ready to have a conversation? That bubble says, what's in it for me? That's what your customer or your prospect is thinking. And when I feel as business professionals, it's important for us to always have that concept, WIFM, as a driver when we're carrying on a business conversation. And one way to satisfy that driver and make certain that our customer or prospective customer or client understands that we're interested in them is to really pay attention to them when they talk. In other words, to develop our listening skills. And that's what we're going to talk about. As sales professionals, we are professional communicators, really. Effective communication skill number one is listening. It's one of the most important aspects of effective communication. Successful listening means not just understanding the words or the information being communicated, but this is also making an attempt to understand how the speaker or the people that are talking to us feel about what they're communicating. So let's talk about the skill set around effective listening. Active or effective listening is a skill. And like any skill, there are a series of steps or points that we need to keep in mind as we begin to consider skill development. So often, we find ourselves listening only to words. As we participate in active listening, we want to listen with all of our senses because messages are communicated in a variety of ways, not just with words. Vocal inflection, body language, and other nonverbal communication often change the meaning of words. Consider this. I say, yeah, right. That sounds really positive, doesn't it? When I say the same words, yeah, right, with an eye roll, those words are spoken with cynicism and can communicate doubt and lack of trust. So it's not just about the words. And as you are considering listening, try to listen with your whole self. So how do we do this? We want to look directly at the person that's speaking to us. We don't want to allow those other distractions that we talked about to keep you from giving this conversation your full attention. You want to observe body language, both your body language and their body language. And most important, and one that we all need to attend to as salespeople, is to avoid listening with the goal of preparing a response to that initial statement. Listen all the way through until your customer or prospect is completed before you begin to develop your reply. And not only listen with all of our senses, but communicate with your whole self. People that are communicating with us subconsciously observe the cues we give as to whether or not we're really listening to them. Again, square yourself off to face the person, open your posture, and lean in. Lean in a bit towards the person speaking. Keep eye contact throughout the message all possible, and relax. As you're developing your skill on reflecting messages back, your intent is to validate that you have understood what's being said. You might want to consider using such phrases as you're reflecting that might be something like, it sounds to me like what you're saying is, or what do you mean when you say, and then you'd repeat what was said, or what I'm hearing you say is, and then in your own words you might paraphrase back what you think was said. Or I'm gathering that you felt or feel, and you state the feeling that you're getting from the conversation. And then when you said, and then you repeat back what they said. We want to always allow the sender to complete the message, and many times we want to jump in to end of the discussion as soon as the speaker makes the point that we feel we can respond to. When we act on that impulse, we can cut your speaker off, essentially wanting to let them know that we get it. You don't need to be talking anymore, Mr. Customer. I understand, so to speak. We have an answer ready. The individual speaker may conclude that we're not interested in what they have to say when that happens. It's difficult in situations like this to keep quiet, but in the long run, our interests are best served if we avoid jumping to conclusions. We need to work to not interrupt the flow of thoughts, except to reflect and clarify. We can employ a strategy to ensure that we don't move on before the speaker has fully completed the topic by asking, is there anything else? Or what else is important? And so on. One of the most common barriers to good listening is when you hear something interesting and immediately start framing a reply based on what you've just heard. And I know we've all done that. Of course, while you're thinking about what you're going to say, you're now tuned out to the rest of what your client or customer is saying. One trick to keep in mind, and to keep your mind on your speaker, is to mentally echo what they're saying as they say it. And finally, we want to ensure that no matter what we hear, that we respond appropriately and respectfully. We do this by acknowledging that our customer or prospective customer or client has real feelings, even if we disagree with what's being said, or if their interpretation of the reality of situations and events, and we've all been there, is different than ours, we still want to respond to their concerns respectfully. These are all strategies to help you listen and pay attention to the client engagement. We're going to talk about a number of different applicable scenarios where active listening is essential, and we're going to speak to some strategies around those. We need to make sure that no matter what the situation is, strategies for engagement and active listening are consistent in our behavior. The sales cycle involves a number of different environments and a number of different situations. In different situations involved throughout the sales process, that engagement that takes place as a result of your taking note of what's being said and being fully in the moment during those business conversations is critical at every phase. So what we've talked about thus far has been to create some awareness around the need and the importance of paying close and focused attention to what's being said when you're in those sales conversations. The first step, I think you'll all agree, in any engagement is developing credibility and creating relationships with the people that you're dealing with. We're also going to talk about the important discovery call, where we're gathering information and understanding. We're going to discuss situations where we have opportunities to develop solutions and collaborate with our established customers, clients, and prospective customers. And finally, we're going to speak of the role of listening as it relates to formal and informal negotiation. The time and attention that you invest to develop relationships always will hold big payoffs in the end. We said that active listening is a communication technique that increases understanding and rapport between a speaker and a listener. You have to have two. Rather than passively listening to the speaker or not listening at all, the active listener pays close attention to both the verbal cues and the body language, and then repeats back or creates probing or confirming questions about the most important points of the speaker's message. Active listening is helpful in building rapport between you and the speaker because by following the basic pattern of listening and then stating the important facts or asking a confirming question, You showed the speaker conclusively that you're paying attention to them. This is particularly good in sales scenarios. For the prospect, often expects to be ignored, expects to be pitched, or expects to be talked over. Why? Because that's what a lot of salespeople do. By showing that you value the prospect's opinion and point of view, you can quickly build trust and rapport. Stephen Covey, in his wildly successful book, published a long time ago, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, said, "Seek first to understand." Active listening, or active listeners, understand people better and overall tend to be more productive. During the engagement process, we are essentially on point in our desire to understand. And in that important discovery call, it's essential to avoid misunderstandings. When you are honing your active listening skills, you're repeating back the summary of what you just heard. This is beneficial because the speaker then has a chance to correct anything that you didn't hear right or understand correctly. Have you ever had a situation where you repeated back to someone your interpretation of what was just said, and they came back to you with, "No, that's not what I said at all"? I have. And when I go back and put that into the context of that particular discussion, it was really helpful that I'd reflected on what was said, because by doing so, I got clarification. That additional information clarification saved me a lot of headache down the line. So, active listening has the potential to nip misunderstandings in the bud before they have a chance to throw your sales cycle completely off track. The most obvious use of active listening is during the qualifying and prospecting and discovery stages of the sales cycle. Note, I didn't say the most important use. I said the most obvious use. Often during this time, your prospect will reveal helpful information spontaneously, and these information bites are critical to identifying his hot buttons. That will be of benefit to you long term as you come closer to closing the deal. What we don't talk about much is the fact that silence is a great tool for effective discovery. We need to be comfortable with silence. That's difficult. Why? Because we all intuitively feel a need to fill up the empty space that silence creates. And salespeople and leaders, because we are salespeople and leaders, we're pretty much all natural conversationalists. That's why we are good at selling or leading. However, since we are good at talking and comfortable talking, we're pretty great at being direct and open, and that can get us in trouble during the discovery process. I'd like to ask all of you to remember that even though you truly enjoy carrying the conversation, the discovery conversation is not about you in any way. That's why we all need to learn to be quiet. To maximize your role in the discovery, remember 2 things. Once that conversation starts, listen and be quiet. Think about this. How many times have you asked a discovery question and your prospect answered it so quickly it almost sounded like a scripted response? That quick response tells me that they've been asked that question before. It's what happens next that differentiates a great seller from those who barely make quota. The best-in-class sellers listen. If you ask your prospect a question, really listen to the answer. Absorb it. Stop for a minute. Write down the answer and make any notes that might be relevant for your follow-up question. Then wait. If you're willing to sit back and be quiet for a minute, the prospect will often start talking again. Now, I'm not saying you should have a standoff. Just wait for 5 or 10 seconds. Write something down. Be pensive. Your prospect will likely feel the need to break that silence. It's only human nature. When that prospect starts talking for the second time, That's when he or she moves away from those boilerplate answers she's been giving every other vendor. And that's when you'll learn things that you can use to cue up your own sales conversation. Remember, the best questions often come from the answer you just heard. That is, the answer you heard if you were truly tuned in and listening. Ultimately, the goal in the discovery call is to engage your client or prospective client to work with you to mutually develop a solution. When that happens, you're working at getting their buy-in. And so the other person's perspective is extremely important. And when we have buy-in, we have their engagement. Using active listening at this time accomplishes two things. First, you will fully understand and will have verified with what the prospect told you. And you can use those cues to successfully close the sale. Second, you will have demonstrated respect for your prospect, which gives you a huge boost in the rapport building and credibility department. When someone else is speaking, try to listen with your eyes as well as your ears. Body language is as important to convey the meaning as spoken language. You'll miss the true message if you listen and don't look. The speaker will know that you're paying attention as you maintain eye contact. Best practice in this phase, solution development, would be that you come in with a question list that you created prior to the call. Remember, discovery and solution development are not about interrogation, so you want to edit those questions down. Keep the questions that will create conversation. Ideally, conversation that's going to lead to the solution that you and your company can provide. Remember, your prospect doesn't need an inquisition, so don't interrogate. This is a sales conversation. In the process of prepping for the call, those questions that you're going to create are compelling. And they are compelling in a manner that the response will require that your customer, client, or prospect share their point of view. Now, this is an important note. Again, we want to determine the prospect's point of view, the customer's point of view, the client's point of view. The goal is not necessarily, and this is hard, but the goal is not necessarily to share yours. You already have a point of view, and we know that. You know where you need to end up in the conversation. When you are looking to develop solutions, use your main questions as an outline for the dialogue, and then use your listening skills to take note and execute. The listening skills help you execute the call. Use the answers to those questions you've asked to create follow-up questions. This initial important dialogue that takes place during solution development demonstrates your goal to value the point of view of your prospect, and it shows positive business intent. The questions you develop and present, combined with your attention and your reflection on the answers and information you get based on those questions, validate your point of view, clarify, pull information from your prospect, avoid a misunderstanding, and have the potential to lead towards your value driver. Once a speaker has finished talking, briefly summarize what's been said. For example, you might say something like, "It sounds like you are happy with your current solution, except that you wish it included the latest technology." That shows the speaker that you're listening. It'll give you a cue to what's important if they agree. It'll avoid misunderstanding if they disagree. And it also gives them a chance in the correction of those misunderstandings to share some more information with you. Summarizing the speaker's meaning will also tend to pull out more details that you can ultimately use to tailor your presentation on your capabilities, to develop your pitch, or to create more effective conversations in the long run. And that active listening promotes active engagement. And as we work with our customers in all of these scenarios, but in particular in collaboration, listening becomes a two-way street, and that listening promotes active engagement. Communication is the key. Maintaining strong and effective business-to-business relationships and partnerships align with that of maintaining any positive, healthy relationship. That's what communication is all about. True collaboration happens when business partners begin taking the time to listen and learn from one another instead of simply dictating terms. To be successful, sit back, relax, use your eyes and use your ears. We've all known successful partnerships are more than just a contract being signed or a purchase order being completed. It involves setting up well-designed and carefully constructed processes for joint decision-making and collaboration. And don't underestimate the value of listening and engaging with one another. This plays a critical part in all successful business partnerships. For optimal engagement, use, again, clear and well-thought-out questions to start the dialogue. Take the time to understand one another, and then that dialogue that you've started will stay open. By doing so, you'll ensure your specific business goals and expectations are better aligned, and that will contribute to mutual success. Most importantly, by listening to one another, you will learn from each other's businesses and possibly identify new opportunities, something that's very important in the upselling process as we engage and develop stronger and longer relationships with our current customers. Truly successful partnerships are about moving beyond short-term goals. As you listen to one another, you'll discover the true motivations for long-term, efficient, and productive business relationships and alignment. The ability to clearly understand and demonstrate not only what's in it for you, but to reflect and remind the relationship and what's in it for your customer, both today and tomorrow and moving forward, is one of the critical factors for a long-term healthy relationship. The listening process will help clarify each role, each individual's obligations within their respective roles, and ultimately benefits all business-to-business partnerships. Through active listening and the exchange of ideas ongoing with your client or customer, that can also lead to discovery about what each party can do to help the other be more successful. So through the process of collaboration, you have the opportunity to circle back to even strengthen your relationships by respectfully engaging and listening to your customer. The listening process helps build one of the most critical aspects of any business relationship, and that's trust. We demonstrate trust by listening and learning from our clients, from our customers, from our prospects to a certain extent, and our business partners, while offering open dialogue. So why is effective communication essential for collaboration? Effective communication and active listening means being consciously, let's highlight that, consciously aware of the message you are sending and the messages you're receiving. That's important because it's the only way to ensure that the person or people you're sending the messages to are receiving them properly. And it's the only way to ensure that the messages you are receiving from the people or person that you are dealing with is correct. Through active listening and active engagement, you create an environment, and you can control this environment, where you can ask relevant questions for clarification, provide input, act on information appropriately, and provide effective feedback. And just as the collaboration process has issues that need to be identified and agreed upon, the negotiation process is most effective if we are able to validate the other person's perspective while we communicate our own. The communication and validation of perspective is key. There's an old Chinese proverb that goes like this: to listen well is as powerful a means of influence as to talk well, and is essential to all true conversation. Think about that. The failures of negotiations can usually be pinpointed to a few areas. Failure to identify all parties, failure to identify all the issues, failure to identify the other party's options, and inadequate information gathering. Well, I think inadequate information gathering certainly impacts failure to identify parties, failure to identify issues, and failure to identify opponents, don't you? Basically, in any conversation, discussion, or negotiation, listening is just as important or even more important than talking. It's about having an exchange, but more important than just the exchange, it's about fully understanding what the other person is saying. In notes from an interview with the former FBI hostage and negotiator, Chris Voss, he states that active listening is the key to any negotiation. Voss goes on to say, you want to use it to gather information, and you need to find out everything you possibly can throughout the negotiation process. And you have to take all of your assumptions and test them. Those rules certainly resonate in the context of a business negotiation. One key to gathering information effectively is the process of active listening. You need to do more than just hear what the other party is saying. Active listening requires showing your interest, paying attention, repeating back, paraphrasing what's been said, all with the intent to indicate your understanding. At this point, you might use some of those confirming questions, and again, use effective pauses, silence, to allow the other party an opportunity to get into that second level of talking. Again, three important aspects of communication and negotiation: listening, speaking, and the interpretation of the information that's heard. And in negotiation, again, it's very important to pay attention to both verbal and nonverbal communication. As listening relates to negotiation, I would like to remind you of the three major forms of listening. The first is passive. You're receiving the message, no feedback. No feedback about accuracy, no feedback about the completeness of the information. The second form of listening is acknowledgement. Those who hear the receiver will occasionally nod, say, maintain eye contact, respond with little statements like, okay, understand, heard you. In this case, you have to be a little careful because that acknowledgement can become a little dicey, because we need to make certain that as we're acknowledging what's being said, that interpretation is not that we're necessarily in agreement. The message with those little non-statements is to say, okay, Mr. Client, Mr. Customer, I hear you. I don't necessarily agree, but I hear you. And finally, we will use active listening and negotiation, where we will find the receiver paraphrasing the sender's message. And again, the active listening places much greater emphasis on listening over speaking, will respond to concrete rather than abstract points. An active listener in the negotiation scene will follow what the speaker is saying rather than leading him or her into an area that the listener thinks should be explored. And the active listener will acknowledge the feelings of the speaker. Listening is the ultimate strategic advantage in negotiation. Your ability to listen and to focus will always put that advantage on your side, as it should be, on your side of the negotiation table. So let's do a quick review. We have some actionable points. And so, as you're working through the conversation, it may be important from time to time to bring the facts and pieces of the problem together to check understanding. And you will do this by restating and reflecting. To show that you're listening, repeat every so often what you think the person said by paraphrasing what you heard in your own words. For example, "Let me see if I'm clear about this," you might say. Or, "What I heard you say was," or, "Let's see if I got this right." And then, as you reflect, you might use the speaker's words in terms of feeling. For example, you might say, "This seems really important to you, Mr. Customer," or, "I sense that you're quite frustrated about this issue." We want to give feedback. As you're giving feedback, let the other person know your initial thoughts on the situation, and here you might share pertinent information, observation, insights, and experiences. But it's important that you listen carefully to their feedback to confirm understanding. And during this whole process, you may want to make certain that when appropriate, you use probing questions to draw the other person out and get deeper and more meaningful information. For example, you might say something like, "What do you think would happen if you," and you reflect back on something that they suggested. The minimal encouragers that we discussed to encourage the conversation, use brief prompts to keep it going and to show that you're listening. For example, right, got it, understood. In this way, the speaker knows that you're taking notes, that you're paying attention to what's being said, and that will encourage them to continue speaking. We validate to acknowledge the individual's problems, issues, and feelings. As we listen openly and with empathy, we make great strides in relationship building. As we respond in an interested way, for example, we might say something like, "I appreciate your willingness to talk about such a difficult or such an important issue." And we can take the step further by helping put feelings into words to encourage the other individual to see things more objectively. To open that sort of conversation, we might say something like, "I'm sensing that you're feeling frustrated," or "My sense is that this challenge is creating a little bit of anxiety in your office." Deliberately pause on key points for emphasis. When you do this, it sends a message that you're saying something that's very important to the other person, and allow for a comfortable silence to slow down the exchange. This gives your other person, your customer, your client, your prospect, time to think as well as to talk. As you're working through the conversation and you redirect, it might be important from time to time to list facts and pieces of the problem to check understanding. For example, you might say something like, "So, it sounds to me as if I'm now understanding that you have 3 main concerns, and they are," and then you list them and check for understanding. And of course, on the occasion where the conversation might be going totally off track, you want to take the liberty to redirect and get the discussion back on point. Or if the discussion is turned negative, you may want to interject another topic. And finally, part of your feedback might involve talking about the possible consequences of inaction that shake up the discussion a little bit. We've all been involved in situations where sale is stalled, where a decision isn't being made and action isn't being taken. In those cases, it may be time to interject a question about the impact of no action. Let's build some dialogue around that. For example, you might say something like, "What's going to happen if this problem isn't resolved?" Or something like, "What do you think the financial impact will be if this issue isn't corrected?" When you do this, you get your customer or your client to think about the consequences of inaction. And most times, that will create some action. And with that, we're going to move to the final section, and I am looking forward to hearing your commentary or your questions as we wrap up today's session. What communication techniques do you recommend if you have an indifferent prospect? Well, that's an interesting question. Thanks. The fact that your prospect has arranged a meeting with you, set time in their calendar, or agreed to spend time talking with you indicates that there's some interest. So we can't forget that. So probably the contact or the person that you're dealing with really isn't indifferent. What we want to do, and the most effective thing to do to deal with what you might perceive as indifference, is to arrange those questions and build your questions around things that you know are going to be important to the customer. And as long as you are focusing what you're talking about, remember the bubble, what's in it for me, then you can pretty effectively break through and get some engagement and conversation going. People are interested in people who are interested in them. Will you have follow-on webinars on this same subject? Well, I appreciate that question, Jack, and we do have the ability to create webinars based on what you, our listeners, want, and so we certainly could create some content around that. However, this webinar will be able to be downloaded, and so you will have the opportunity to go back to that. How do you communicate with a customer who does not care or who is very negative? Carl, with that question, I think, once again, we need to always remember that our customers are people. There may be occasions when we're in a call and the customer is having an extremely difficult day for a reason that we aren't aware of or that we don't understand. And so when you have a customer who your feeling is that they are being very, very negative, you might be able to craft some questions around what you think they're being negative about and see if you can draw out just what is bothering them. So if, for example, you're talking to a customer about some sort of an issue that you have had, where maybe you had a failure with your product and service and that's created some angst for them, I think that many times we try to avoid digging deeper in that because it's uncomfortable for us. But if that's what's causing their negativity, it's certainly a great idea to get to the bottom of the problem and then work together to try to resolve it and to try to develop some solutions to eliminate that negativity. And there are some people who are just negative. And so with that, I feel like, again, the point is we need to talk to them to get their engagement about things that are important to them. And final question. For office-based sales professionals, what techniques can you recommend for lack of facial reactions and body language to gauge your customers? Thanks for that question, Andrea, and I have personal experience with that because I spent my entire career being an outside salesperson, and then I switched to a business years ago where all of a sudden I had to deal with talking to people on the phone, and I didn't have the opportunity to walk in the door and see what they had on their wall or see whether it looked like they were having a good day or a bad day or something in between, or see what their environment was that may be causing distractions. And my experience with this was that I began paying very strong attention to the inflection in their voice. And I paid strong attention to their pauses. And I paid a lot of attention to the responses they gave to me to determine whether they were paying attention or not. And I did have situations where I felt like, based on that analysis I did, that I was able to say, you know, maybe this isn't a good time to have this conversation. Would it be better if we rescheduled it for tomorrow? Or I would be able to tell from their inflections, Maya, it sounds like you're really busy today. Thanks for taking time out to talk to me. And so that's a skill that can be developed. And we talked a lot about the verbal cues, but there are a lot of cues that you can hear from listening that can give you a pretty good idea or almost give you a visual of what's going on in that person's office. And so we don't have time for more questions. I thank you for those. However, I'll be happy to answer any questions with an email coming back to you or a quick conversation on the questions that we didn't get to. And at this time, I would like to remind you that you can load the slides today from the webinar by going to valueselling.com, resources and webinars. And so this is for you to reflect. And we also have in that area newsletters, other webinars you might want to take a look at, and the opportunity to take advantage of some of the offerings that we have in the Value Selling store. Finally, I would like to thank Marissa Liu and Chris Marino for helping me put this together, as well from Value Selling, as well as Lynn DeGarmo from Transforto. I want to remind you to check in with us next time. We're going to be talking about stories. I love that subject. Hook 'em with Value-Based Stories will be presented on the 19th of May at 10 o'clock Pacific time. Don't forget to follow us and engage with us. And I thank you for your time and attention. This has been great fun for me. If you would like to have any further discussion, don't hesitate to give me a call or send me an email, and we all look forward to talking to you next time. Thank you, and have a great morning, evening, afternoon. All in all, have a great day. Bye-bye.